So far away, Lucas, what's your favourite pointless remake?
Pointless remake. Maybe The Thing in like the worst way possible. Like,
hey, that's not a remake. That's a prequel, and it sucks. Have I ever told this story?
Well, actually, isn't technically John Carpenter's The Thing a
yes,
remake?
It is. Thing from Another
so
World.
That might be my actual answer.
Thing from Another World, yeah, but like they recycle the basic plot. But Joe, here's the thing I got fooled by. Happened the other day. Right, we did a thing for the side channel, which you can check out below. There'll be an extended version of the conversation on Patreon, but talking about bad movies that I think have value. And I said The Thing. And during that conversation, I talked about how I own a DVD copy of The Thing and a Blu-ray copy of The Thing. However, this version of The Thing is not this version of The Thing. This is The Thing 2011. This is The Thing like 1980, wherever it was released.
The good one, the Kurt Russell one.
Do you know the only way you can tell the difference? Where it says up here, from the producers of Dawn of the Dead.
Right.
I fell for it hook, line, and sinker.
So you accidentally bought the Blu-ray one thinking it was the John Carpenter version.
And out of stubborn pride, I refused to buy another one. So every year when it starts snowing, I do a double feature of watching this and then this.
A great movie and a terrible movie.
But
both
what makes it so hilarious is
hand.
that the conversation is me talking about how, I don't think people, ascribe enough importance to media literacy. Being aware of the things that you're consuming and just having, just that base level of knowledge, so that you don't get tricked or propagandized to, is very important. And I say, but I'm not immune to that because I fucking fell for it. I bought the wrong thing because I didn't look closely enough at the media I was consuming.
But you got two great movies out of it, Carl.
I did. Well, to be fair, as I say, the whole point of the discussion is that while I don't like the movie, I do think it has value. And to find out why, you can go watch the video on the Untitled Side channel when it gets released, but there'll be a link to that below. But
and I will say that was not intended or scripted. I genuinely did not know you'd had that discussion.
No, that's the thing. You weren't privy to it. You made some suggestions for it, but I just thought, what a great, organically introduce this other thing that we do. But yeah, remakes. Red Dawn 2012 is a film mostly known for being stuck in production hell for about 2 years before the company making it literally went bust. It's also notable for using CGI to remove China from the plot. Which is just great. So, Lucas, this is a really, really fun story. But first, we need to set a baseline for everybody. Do you know what Red Dawn is?
So Red Dawn was a movie in the 70s about I think it was the 70s anyway. I wasn't born.
That era,
but about, was it Russia invading the USA and taking over?
Well, a loose overview of the plot is that the Soviet Union, with assists from Nicaragua and Cuba, invade the continental US intent on stomping its balls. At which point a group of plucky teenagers are all band together to fight off the invading forces using guerrilla warfare tactics, and in the remake, Subway.
Dude. Nobody move! Sandwich artist, fill this shit with bread.
And the film is hilarious. And I mentioned earlier about, viewing media with a more critical eye. This is one of those films that you 100% should do that with, because it is so overtly it's propaganda. I'm going to put it like it is so obvious, no, America #1, fuck you. These plucky teenagers can fight off the combined forces of 3 rival nations because they're communist. But our teenagers, they're American. Look at them go.
Freedom, Carl. Freedom.
Hilarious scenes in it, such as a little teenager holding an M60 going Wolverines! It's he just gets shot.
Wolverines!
However, Carl, it did lead to one of the most singularly impressive moments of TV I've ever seen, where there was so there was the guy that had prepped to live in the sewers.
Yes.
From the Preppers show.
We did that episode of Wiki Weekends, which, fun fact, is its own channel now. You can check that out below. Look at that. Look at these organic ass plugs we're doing in this episode, where we talk about doomsday preppers, and there's the guy who basically is planning for Red Dawn. And he's like, well, yeah, you know, at some point, a foreign rival nation is going to invade the US, and all of our institutions are going to fall. So this guy's like legitimately thinking that some rival nation is going to invade. I think he says, I think he singles out Al Qaeda. It's not even a rival nation, just this like, you know, loosely associated group of terrorists who don't like America. He's going to invade the United States. Like, this is what he thinks: invade the United States, topple the institutions of power, like neuter all like, you know, avenues of response, like, you know, SEAL Team 6, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, all that good stuff. But then he's going to fight back. And his plan is to hide in the sewers with a bow and arrow, eating barbecue food that he steals from his family's barbecue restaurant.
So this is what a sewer system looks like.
I think this will work pretty good for getting around, don't you?
Yeah.
Salem sewers are part of a larger system that serves several local cities and spans 770 miles. Mike fears he could easily get lost and pop up in the middle of a terrorist force.
Isn't like he planning all this when he's got like a pregnant diabetic wife, and he's like, well, I guess like if we live in the sewers, you just get no medicine. I'm sorry.
He's hiding diabetes medicine in the sewers, and it's like that thing of like, this is the kind of effect that films like that have on people, like that American exceptionalism of like, well, of course I'm going to be able to fight off this, like, you know, invading force because I've got a gun. I'm American. It's like, no, that's not how it works. It's like, again, I recommend people go watch the film through that lens. It is hilarious. It's also, as well, just got some great lines in it, such as Wolverine, which is just so great. I do say that on at least 3 times a day, usually when I'm making a cup of tea. The film is mostly notable for being in development hell for 2 years and starring a pre-fame Chris Hemsworth and a post-fame, what's his name, Lucas?
It is Josh Peck.
Josh Peck, and it is awful. And it's not just awful, it's also an amazing case study on something that has become incredibly prevalent in modern filmmaking today, and that is bending over backwards to lick the shit-covered boot heel of China. So are you at all familiar with the concept of China as a film market and what films and Hollywood in general will do to get its films aired in China?
Well, yeah, China's obviously like a massive market. It's like one of the 2 biggest populations in the world alongside India, and like obviously that means massive amount of money, you know, can be spent over there on cinema tickets and stuff like that. So there's a lot of changes that can be made, or like, you know, maybe adaptations of movies and stuff where maybe they just appeal a little bit more to China so that they can hit that mass appeal over there.
Yeah. And when we say, like, you know, changing things to appeal to a specific market, that's not always necessarily a bad thing. For example, a lot of Disney movies have changes in them that are just done for regional reasons. For example, the film Inside Out is a very famous one, where it's when the dad is thinking, like, you know, in America, he's thinking about like American football, whereas like the rest of the world, it's soccer. Or like the kid when they're eating the pizza. Like in Japan, it has like bell peppers on it, whereas in the rest of the world, it has broccoli on it, I think, because like in Japan, broccoli is not seen as like, you know, a food kids don't like. Bell peppers are.
Oh, yeah, it's like when they're trying to feed other, not on pizza, just like they're trying to feed awkward food, it like changes.
But that wouldn't make sense in some markets, so they change that. But on the flip side of a coin, some of those changes can be quite unsettling. You know, Disney again, for example. Disney have, like, you know, edited out gay kisses in a bunch of its movies to appeal, or have their movies available for release in markets where they are, you know, not friendly towards gay people. And it kind of sucks. Like, you know, was it Star Wars? Where it's like, oh, it's got the first on-screen gay kiss in Star Wars in a blinky you'd miss it cutaway that they can easily edit out of foreign releases in markets where they don't like that.
Yeah, I know, like, less so nowadays because they got quite a lot of, you know, positive feedback because in Eternals they refused to remove the gay kiss, right?
But then they'll do it in other markets, and it's like, you know, companies are not your friends. But
no,
like, this isn't to say like, these things are always bad. Sometimes it's done just for the sake of making the product easier to understand for a specific market. Like, you have amusing examples of that, like, you know, Pokemon, like rice balls, like ongiri. Like, what are they in, like, you know, most Western markets? Jelly donut.
You look kind of down, Ash. Huh? Have a donut. That always cheers me up.
Because they thought it was easier for kids to, like, believe that these clearly, like, rice-looking objects were jelly donuts, rather than just being, like, there are a thing called rice balls that you don't eat normally. Is that I was a kid, if someone told me it was a ball of rice, I'd know what it was a ball of rice.
That's the thing, it's a regional difference, isn't it? That's difficult to explain, especially it's like a younger child. It's like, fuck it, just change it and make it something that's more easily relatable so we don't have to go through the rigmarole of explaining it. And sometimes that can be done for like good reasons, sometimes bad. But the important thing to note is that it happens a lot, and it's a pretty established and well-known part of making movies and indeed media. If you want to make media for a mass market, you have to be aware of the compromises and concessions you're going to have to make to appeal to certain demographics.
And as well, like, not just necessarily changes, but just influences of how many movies have, like, a random 20, 30-minute segment in China for almost no reason. And it's, like, kind of explained away in the plot. And now that I mention it, that there's a lot of times that will happen, and you might notice it. I think that it does it in, like, a Transformers movie, and, like, there was, like, Catch Me If You Can 2, they just randomly end up teleported to China.
如同我承诺过的，我修理好了 paper， 敲打了一会儿，然后我想，为什么要在这儿停下来呢？
And the reasoning for that is because when you are like making these changes for most markets, you do it for the people there. Whereas when you're making these changes for movies that you're going to release in China, you're doing it for the government. Because the Chinese government is notoriously censorious and repressive of its people and doesn't allow a lot of outside media in. And I think it's about 10 films per year they would let in from foreign markets around the time they were making Red Dawn, which means that only 10 Western releases could get a release inside of China around the time they were making Red Dawn. If you were one of those 10, you gained access to what was essentially a billion-person market that no other film besides 9 others got access to. That was a pretty sweet, and a lot of movies and studios were willing to make a lot of pretty substantial concessions to gain access to that market, the most hilarious of which being Red Dawn.
And is this talking now about 2012's Red Dawn, I presume?
Yeah. So this is 2012's Red Dawn. So in the original script, they realised, well, we can't make Russia the bad guys again. Like, that's a bit cliche. And then Russia themselves became bad guys like 10 years later. So
yeah, I was like, is it?
Time is a flat circle. So, and they looked at who's the political boogeyman right now. And it's like, oh, it's China, and to a lesser extent, North Korea. Well, let's make China, with an assist from North Korea, the villains, much in the same way in the original film, with the Soviet Union with an assist from Cuba and Nicaragua. And that also allows to keep the name the same. It's like Red Dawn. Like the red is like, you know, an obvious allusion to like the red in the Soviet flag. That still makes sense with the Chinese flag, because the Chinese flag is red. And they realized very quickly during production that shit was not going to fly in China, because China does not allow any movies into its markets that portray them as a bad guy, which is why, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of movies will have random scenes set in China that portray China in a good light, because they effectively serve as propaganda for the entire country. For example, you mentioned like Transformers, where they go to China. That was put in so that they could release that movie in China, and those movies do gangbusters numbers in China.
Yeah, and like Shang-Chi recently had one where like they were in Macau and they were like, oh man, Macau's so cool and great.
It's so nice, yeah. Basically an ad, and like, you know, and the Chinese government can use that as propaganda on the world stage. And it's something in the world of politics known as soft power. And a basic explanation is hard power is things like your military. Soft power is cultural exports. So, for example, for many years, it was considered that the monarchy was part of Britain's soft power, because, you know, it was a thing that people were aware of, that they generally had positive feelings about, that just generally improved the standing of Britain in the minds of people, like, you know, that weren't in Britain. Not so much anymore, but that's an example that I learned when I was doing media in college.
Right, yeah.
And, like, you know, in the same vein, like, you know, movies can be considered soft power, especially movies that portray your country in a, you know, in a positive light. And in the same way, China sees, like, you know, these movies that portray their country in a, let's just say, favourable light, can be used as, like, you know, part of their soft power efforts. And the producer of Red Dawn were forced to make some pretty hilarious changes to that movie, given what the actual plot is.
Oh, right, okay.
So
it's pretty hard to, like, edit your way around being like, China are the bad guys and are invading our country. Like, how the hell do they get around that?
Well, the first thing they did is rewrote the entire film to make North Korea the bad guys. Which, okay, sure, North Korea are always threatening to do something or other, but the idea that North Korea could invade the continental US is laughable.
What's going on?
Like, they can't even get missiles into the air without falling into the ocean. Now they're like, they've got an army capable of like invading the US. Okay, we'll look past that. And then as well, like the North Korean flag, while it does have red on it, it's not entirely red, so now the title of the film doesn't make sense, but whatever. But one thing I should point out about these changes is that a lot of them were made after the fact, by which I mean most of the film had already been shot.
All I can imagine in my head right now is like a scene where, it shoots to Chris Hemsworth being like, we've got to stop China. And then like an ADR line comes in where he just says like North Korea instead, and it doesn't match his mouth flapping.
Well, it's almost that bad because they just went in and CGI'd out all the Chinese flags and replaced with North Korean ones. Like so the patches on soldiers' armor and stuff like that. All references to China were like excised from the film. It's dialogue, like in some cases, it's been very lazily edited around. They also just dubbed over the Chinese that were spoken with Korean. And it's one of those things where it's also like borderline racist. So it's like, oh, the actors they cast in some cases were Chinese American, but they dubbed them over with Korean.
It's like just make them Korean, no one will notice. It's like,
and it's that's the thing, because that's what they said behind the scenes. Like when they were having this argument of like, well, the actors are Chinese American, they're not Korean. Who's gonna know? That's what they said. That's what they said, because that's the kind of shit Hollywood does all the time. Like, we're just going to dub over these Chinese actors with Korean, but they're not Korean. Who's going to give a shit?
Yeah, no one's going to know the difference. Like, oh.
And the fact they're making decisions like that is just really off-putting. But it gets better, Lucas, because they also had to edit over a bunch of propaganda posters that they made for the film that were ostensibly from like the Chinese invaders. And do you have the original article in front of you now, Lucas?
I do indeed, yeah.
Scroll down and look at the posters and just go from left to right and read them out to me. Because these are the propaganda posters that the invading Chinese forces in the original version of the film, before it got edited and cut down, would put on walls to convince the populace that they were there for a good reason. What does it say?
Yeah, it has 3 posters here. First one says, we are restoring your country. The next one is repairing your economy.
Yep.
And third is fighting corporate corruption.
Yes. So the villains of their film are like, no man, all your companies are corrupt. They're just in it for like, they're all about making a buck over anything else, over human life, over your liberty, your freedoms. As the company making the film is like just literally doing that.
Just like they're literally changing a film to bootleg so that they can get a bunch of extra money from a new market.
But that gets even better as well, because as I mentioned, the plot of Red Dawn is like, antagonistic force comes in. No, fuck you, we're America. We're not going to bow down to this oppressive invading force. We're not going to we're not going to debase ourselves by listening to you and changing our way of life, the way we do things, because you said so. As you said, they're making decisions behind the scenes to kowtow to the Chinese government. They're literally doing the thing the characters in their film, like, Americans would never do this.
America might not, but Hollywood will, Carl.
That's why it's so funny with Red Dawn. Like, the plot of the film is literally Americans would never bow down to the oppressive government of this invading nation. As the company's making it, like, yeah, maybe we'll do a little bit.
And for them, this is just some place. But for us, this is our home.
Just a tad.
Just a tad, just a little bit of the tree. Like, they are bending over backwards to lick China's shit-covered boot heel. And do you know what the best part about all this is, Lucas?
Go ahead.
Red Dawn never got a release in China.
Of course it didn't.
They did all this, made all these changes, got down, they worked the shaft, they cradled the balls. They went all the way in there. All the way in, and then afterwards China's like, no thanks. They spent I think it was a couple million doing this and got nothing for it.
Oh, the fact that they lost money doing that is just poetic.
It's fucking hilarious. And stuff like this is always difficult to talk about because it is so pervasive throughout all forms of media, to the point where I don't think there's any major bit of media out there that has not done this at least a little bit.
I mean, we've already mentioned a few in passing in this video, and there's not many, big production companies out there that are willing to turn down the potential money of, like, as we say, a over 1 billion person market.
And the old saying of there's no ethical consumption of capitalism has never rung more true. And it's just, every company out there would sell you out in a second, regardless of who you are, if it made them a buck.
Yeah.
They don't give a shit. Like, companies have no morals. They have no guiding ethos. The only thing they care about is making more money. And very often that results in them making decisions like this. But on the other hand, sometimes it does have a net positive if you look at it in a certain way. And a thing we've talked about in the past is the idea that the desire to make money is going to be a driving force in social change. Do you remember this?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Just kind of the base idea is like, well, we see a lot of different, companies making a push towards, for example, supporting Pride Month and making a push towards that. And for most companies, it's probably because they see supporting Pride, now that it's become a bit more of a movement, as more profitable than going against it.
Yeah, and you can look at that in the cynical way that a lot of people tend to do, and for good reason. The companies are only co-opting Pride imagery to make money because they want to sell shit with a rainbow flag on it for a markup. And they are doing that. Like, there is no question that they're doing it for completely selfish reasons to make money. But the way that I like to look at it, so I don't go mad and just throw myself out of a window, is that yes, it's cynical as fuck, but just the existence of that imagery in the world will very slowly, but very noticeably, just nudge public perception towards acceptance. Pride Month used to be a very niche thing. And that's why they'd have the protests and the marches, and why the slogan for so many years was we're here, we're queer, get used to it. And now you can't move every June from being bombarded with Pride imagery. And yeah, a lot of it is cynical, but it's there.
And we're not saying that as in we're fed up of seeing it.
It's
no, it's a great thing because it's getting its eyes on, more people are getting their eyes on the imagery, and then maybe that'll make a push towards a lot of people saying, well, oh, the companies that I like and that I support this movement, so therefore maybe I should either look into it or reevaluate my opinions, or maybe just get a bit of extra perspective on what I might, not be informed about.
Or in the case of most people, it's just going to be, it becomes a fabric of everyday life and reality.
Yeah.
And that's my view on it, is it just very slowly nudges it just a little bit, and it's going to eventually drive, not all social change, but a little bit.
But you know what, Carl? This video is going either out, in or around Pride Month.
Yeah, it should be going out around June. That's why I mentioned it, yeah.
So yeah, we can go happily and enjoy our Pride Month, and I hope everybody, is out there and being supportive and, supporting the LGBTQ plus community, and just go and enjoy Pride.
And there are people out there, no doubt, in the comments of this video, or just sat at home frothing at the idea, they're getting angry that gay people are being acknowledged. I hate this. The fact that it is now more profitable to not just acknowledge that gay people exist, but actively co-opt their imagery for profit, as cynical and awful as that is a lot better than what it was 10 years ago, where ignoring it was the more profitable thing to do. And it's the same thing, you always have it with diversity quotas and things like that for making movies, and it's they're just trying to force it. Well, you kind of have to at the start, because the analogy I always use is imagine you're on a road and you've been driving with your hand on the wheel in one direction. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, the right, for the past 500 fucking years. How are you going to get back? Not to the left, to the centre. You're going to have to all the way. You have to do a big old turn, aren't you? Just to start approaching where the centre is, let alone get to that side of the road. And that's what it is. And it's and eventually, it's going to be a bit awkward the first couple of times you see it. You have those things like panel shows, having to parity, panel. In the UK, we had one that's gender parity on panel shows, and there was pushback from that from the old established comedians. And now no one gives a shit, because now it's become established. After a while, it becomes the norm. But you have to have that awkward, period in the middle where, okay, you have the dinosaurs and the established people who don't like it pushing back, but eventually it's just like, it's now a more open, inclusive. Oh, damn it, we ran out. But we can put that in there. Another Pride thing.
That's why I was trying to give you like the nudge to just wrap it up with saying like enjoy Pride. I was like, oh, we're on like 28.